Hi, this is Hedy from Nanny's Italian Kitchen, showing you how to make my famous Italian meatballs. First, you have to start with chopped meat. Some people use beef, veal, pork. I was taught to use only beef, and that's the way I've done it for 50 years. So you try to get the chopped meat to room temperature, because when you start to fry, if the meat is too cold, it'll stick to the frying pan. Okay, so you have all your chopped meat. Then some people use breadcrumbs, and I use breadcrumbs when I don't have Italian bread, but you could use stale or day-old or 2-day-old bread, and you have to soak it in warm water and then just take the inside and add it to the chopped meat. Now, I'm going to do that now. So this is your Italian bread that you've soaked in warm water, and what you have to do is peel off the brown part, take the inside, make sure it's wet, add it to the chopped meat. This makes the meatballs moist, so you won't have hard meatballs. Some people, well, when I use the breadcrumbs, what I do is I put the breadcrumbs in, but then I add some water. Otherwise, you'll have very hard meatballs, and nobody likes a hard meatball. Okay, so one small loaf. I have 2 3/4 pounds of chopped meat here, and you could use the 85-15 or the 93-7, whatever, but I like to use the 80-20 because, again, your meatballs are not hard, they are juicier, and so I use the 80-20. And you know, you have a little fat in there, and the fat is what makes the meatballs soft and delectable. Okay, after you have your chopped meat and your soaked bread, you should add in your parsley and garlic. I like to chop them really, really fine because nobody likes big chunks of garlic in their meatball, especially not my sons. So I put it in this little mini processor, and it gets it very, very fine. I'll show you in a second. It doesn't take long either. There you go. Parsley, fresh parsley. Here you go, fresh parsley and garlic. I used about 3 large cloves and a handful of parsley. If you want, you could, when I use the bread, I usually put warm water in here and add it into here. I mean, when I use the breadcrumbs. So right now I'm using the bread, so we may not need the extra water. Excuse me. Now you have to add the eggs. I usually put in 1 egg for each pound of chopped meat, and I add 1. So this is 2 3/4 pounds. I put in 4 eggs. After the eggs, there's only a couple of things that are left. It's the grated cheese. I use Pecorino Romano. You can use any kind you like, Lugadelli, what have you. It's usually like a ½ cup for every pound. So this would take about 1½ to 2 cups. Then I add my salt. I use kosher salt. It's much better to cook with. And then I start to mix my meatballs. You have to make sure, let me take my ring off. You have to make sure that you mix it very, very well. You don't want any lumps or big chunks of bread. So you really have to squeeze it. And then if you find that the meatball is kind of dry, you can add a little warm water. You have to, after cooking for like 50 years, you get a feel for the food. I can feel a piece of pasta and know if it's cooked. It's just after so many years of cooking, you get a feel for things. So this should be pretty good, but there's a couple of the pieces of bread are in there, and I'm squishing it around, making sure. I do feel like it's a little bit dry. So what I'm going to do is add very little warm water. That's about right. That's like a quarter of a cup, third of a cup. Should be no more than that. Some people use milk when they add it. Some people like to soak the bread in milk or add milk to the recipe. I was taught from my Neapolitan mother and grandmother and my aunt, my mother Minnie, my grandmother Nanny, and my Aunt Camilla, you use water. So now I'm going to start to roll them. I think I've got it mixed pretty well. And I use fresh parsley. You can use the bottled kind if you like, but nothing beats having fresh parsley, fresh ingredients. Okay, now got it all mixed very well. Here we go. I'm going to start rolling. You can wet your hands a little bit. Warm water again and start to roll. I like to put either a piece of aluminum foil or plastic paper here because, you know, the counters, you never know what's on there. If you have that, you know, you have a clean surface. So this is about the size I usually make. Here you go. Now I'll just keep rolling them. This'll probably make about 28 meatballs, 28 to 30 meatballs. You can make them bigger, you can make them smaller. All right, so I like to roll them. My famous way is 5 down and then keep going. And that's, I have an easy count, 5, 10, 15, 20. You know how many meatballs you have. Okay, so this is, here you go. Get 28 to 30, but I made them a little bigger than I normally do, so I only got 26, but that's okay. What I'm going to do now is, as I said, the meat had to be room temperature, and the meatballs should be a little bit warm too, because when you heat up the oil and you fry them, some people put them in the oven, some people throw them in the sauce just the way they are. I like to fry them. That's the way I was taught, and that's the way I've been doing it all these years. So what I'm going to do is put a little bit of oil in this pot. It's a big pot, but okay, so I just put a little bit of oil in the pot because the juices and the fats from the meat will come out and they'll be very, very greasy. So I like to put just a little bit, heat it up, make sure the oil is very hot before you put the first meatball in, or you're going to have meatballs that stick to the bottom and they won't be meatballs, they'll be chopped meat. Okay, when the oil is hot enough, you put in your meatballs. You can see the sizzle, you can hear the sizzle, and your meatballs hopefully will not stick if the oil is hot enough. Okay, I'm gonna add them. I like to use the pot that I make the sauce in because the flavor that comes out of the meatballs goes into the sauce. But if there's too much oil, you have to skim some off. Okay, so while the meatballs are frying, you put in, I bought this rondo pot because I love it, because it's low and it's not a deep pot, and you can see your meatballs, you can see the meat that's in there, and it really is a great pot to cook in. They're expensive, but what are you going to do? And any true Italian, while they're making their meatballs and their sauce, they have a glass of wine. Chendan. All right, so when you think you have to wait a little while, don't turn them prematurely. You have to, I always use a big long fork to turn my meatballs. And then when I take them out with a slotted spoon. All right. Okay, after you've fried all your meatballs, you take them out, put them in a pot, in a dish here, which I've done. And then, with all the drippings from the meatball, you're going to add, there's all the flavors in here, and you got all drippings from the meatballs, the inside. You're going to put in some garlic. Two cloves is plenty. And you let that stir around here. Get stir that around. Then you put cloves. I had two small ones and one big one. That's another one here. Get that around. There's not that much oil in here, so it won't be that greasy. So you try to get the drippings up. Then you put in some fresh basil. Whoa, it popped. And now you put in your tomatoes. I like to use San Marzano. And then you add your tomatoes. Make sure you have a cover handy or it's going to be, whoa, all over the place. So I take whatever tomato I have here and you make sure you get all the tomatoes. I put my tomatoes in a blender, but some people put them through a sieve. The reason I don't put them through a sieve is that my sons don't like the big chunks of tomato in the soup. I mean in the gravy. You could do whatever you want. Then I add a little bit of salt. A little bit of salt. And a wee bit of sugar to cut the acidity. That's only a wee bit in here. And that cuts the acidity in the tomatoes. Okay? You stir it around. And at this point is when you would add the meat. Like, if you want. Some people also use puree. I don't use puree. I stopped using puree when my mother had a heart attack. And the doctor told her that the puree wasn't good for her. So I haven't used puree, and not puree, excuse me, tomato paste. I haven't used tomato paste in a lot of years because the doctor told her that the tomato paste wasn't good for her. So I stopped using it and I use just the tomatoes. And if I want a little bit more thickness, sometimes I'll use a can of puree. But you really don't need it. At this point would be when you add your sausage, your brajol, your pork, whatever you want to add into there. Today I only made the meatballs to show you, but this here is like a marinara sauce. When you add the meat to it, it becomes a meat sauce. But when we were growing up, it wasn't sauce. I grew up in East Harlem with my mother, my grandmother, my aunts, my uncles. We didn't call it sauce. We called it gravy. And we didn't call it pasta. We called it macaroni. And when we ate on Sunday, we had macaroni and meatballs or macaroni with brajol, whatever. At this point, you let the sauce cook for a little while. If you have your meat in there, your brajol, your sausage, your pork, whatever you want to put in there, you let it cook in there for a while. You only have to add the meatballs in like the last half hour. Now I'm going to do a taste test. Here's my grandson Nico. Here you go, Nico. Nico loves fried meatballs. He likes them better fried than he does in the sauce. He loves fried meatballs. So does my other grandson, Luke. Sonny's not such a big fan of meatballs, I don't think. Are you?
I am.
Okay. Now, when you let the sauce cook, you let the meatballs, you put it in the last half hour, and then you just put your pot on with water and you cook your macaroni. And this is Hedy from Nanny's Italian Kitchen, showing you how to make my famous meatballs, which are A-OK.